Hello YouTube, I'm Scruffy at Scruffy Tales, and welcome to the War Zone. Now, if you're wondering why the usual intro is not in this video, telling everyone I'm an armchair general and a keyboard warrior, well, fact of the matter is that video includes a piece of music that is free to use but can't be monetized. So basically, yeah, I'm a greedy asshole, so I'm not gonna be using that anymore. So now you know. Moving on. And taking a look at a few select locations along the front line in Ukraine, we can safely assume that battle rages, Russia is pushing, trying to claim territory, and Ukraine is holding on, putting up a stubborn defense all along the front line. And we're gonna take a look at the strategical map first of all to orientate ourselves what's going on and where we will be focusing our attention. And here you have it. We have Kupiansk in the north, Terny slightly to the south, and then of course Bakhmut and Avdiivka, these two very much highlighted cities over the last year. And then a bit out of left field, Novomykhailivka, slightly to the south of Marinka. Everyone's talking about Marinka, but I'm more focused on this town. I think it's more interesting. And some events at Robotyne, and just taking a look at what the Ukrainians are up to, doing their shenanigans over at Krinky. So there you have it. Let's move on and to our first stop along the road here. And that would be Kupiansk, that vital town in the far north, very close to the Russian border. So just a quick look, it's the topmost town that we will be focusing on, or we're really not going to be focusing on the Kupiansk, but events near Kupiansk to the east of it. Right, if you hear a blip, that's the headset that shuts down. I'll just restart it in a second or two. And no, I won't edit it out. You're gonna have to live with it. So that's how I roll. It's all on you. Let's see if we can. Oops, I'm Swedish. There we go. So this is what's going on. We have Kupiansk. Kupiansk is over here. We have river. The Oskil River runs here. Russians have been trying for quite some time to try and push into the forest here. Only really managed to take this part. They've managed to push out from Lyman Parshoy. As you can see, it's contested. The Russians are trying a new push here. But the Ukrainians are holding this forest, doing an all the right job. Russia has been trying really intensely to make a push into the forests here and have basically failed, but taken slight territory here and there. But quite recently they have made, for the past 2 months I think, they have made really significant pushes over here in this area here, so much so that Ukraine has launched counter-assaults to push them back. And what we will be taking a closer look at is this territory here, what's going on over here. And here you have it, start of November compared to the 12th of December. Russia, here we have Peshtravevne, or whatever it's called. Russia was located in this small valley here. You get a bunch of river systems all over the place with small valleys. And for the better part of a month and a half, a bit, Russia has made pushes into the valleys here. As you can see, they have claimed a couple of square kilometers up here at outside of Peshtravevne. And they also made some gains down here at Jehidne as they're trying to reach a town here and a town here. So that's what's going on here. And the Russians have pushed into these valleys, as we will explore in greater. Ha! Told you, didn't I? God damn it. Anyway, they've been pushing into these valleys, and we'll be taking a closer look at this location. Here we have Persho-Travevne, and yeah, here you have it, the river system and the small valleys that Russia has pushed into. They had control up here and have now, over the past 1.5 month, pushed in here and pushed down here and into these river systems here and the valleys here. And there's a bit of a hill here that, as a consequence, they are now in control of. Having outflanked it in the low ground, they managed to secure the high ground because it was not reasonable for Ukraine to hold this piece of terrain, as they were at risk of being completely surrounded and outflanked. So they fell back, and Russia now holds this high ground here. And yeah, so I mean, it's not that difficult to see what's going on. A supply hub, basically, for a base of operations for Russia, getting troops out into the low terrain, can send in reinforcements, ammunition, food, water, whatever they need, and they can then push into the river systems, into the valleys, and by so doing outflanking windbreaks as they push along, and then they can, piece by piece, grab windbreaks and farm fields. So if you zoom out, it looks as if they've claimed a lot of farmland, but that's not what's going on. They are pushing into these canals, these river systems, which allows them to outflank Ukrainian positions in the windbreaks, forcing Ukraine to fall back. So yes, they claim a lot of empty farmland, but they have done so by moving in the smart territory, and Ukraine has failed in holding these vital river systems. So that's what's going on up here in Persho-Travevne. And if you can take a look where I believe Russia will be going next, it is to this area here and also down here, another valley with a lot of rivers, just like up here. So Russia needs to cross large sections of farmland. As you can see, it's this, this way across, it's roughly a mile, 1.6 kilometers. Over here, it's roughly 1 kilometer. And down here, Russia is right on the edge, right at the mouth of each valley and river system at 2 locations. So how will Russia be able to cross? Well, they won't be running in the open fields, since that's suicide. They will try and reach these windbreaks here, more than likely. May try and bring up vehicles in the terrain up here that they are in control of to support these actions, with some long-range fire and what have you. But this area here, these windbreaks, indicated with the red arrows, where Russia will more than likely advance, it's this area here. So you can see it's the rivers and the valleys lead straight up to this windbreak. So I think this will be a very crucial fight for Ukraine to try and hold off the Russians. Here, the Russians have to cross open territory, so it's going to be slightly more easy for Ukraine to hold. Russia will probably need to rely somehow on vehicles to reach this windbreak. And as you can see here, there's some open ground. There's a windbreak right here. And as you can see, the windbreak cuts off here. That's here. So Russia might grab this. It's hard for Ukraine to hold that windbreak. You can see it's in the contested area. So it's a small dash for Russia to reach it, but it's also problematic for Ukraine to move troops and equipment to support it. So this windbreak will probably be in Russian control pretty soon, if it probably already is, to be honest. So Ukraine will be holding this windbreak here to try and prevent Russia from dashing across here. And So this windbreak, the middle one, is where Russia will stand the best chance of slowly inching their way forward to this main windbreak down here, and then they are right at the edge of the next vital river system with all the valleys. So why is this valley down here important? Why is Russia trying at the moment to reach it, since they're failing over by the forest at Kupiansk? Well, lo and behold, over here, Kupiansk, and here we have the big valley and river system. The valley is not terribly deep, but it's still deep enough to provide cover for the Russians to advance through, so they don't have to advance out on the open fields. So yeah, as you can see, if this is the area that they've taken in the last month, and now if they get across here, and if they can push in from Yahidne into Ivanivka, they are in the valley, and they can start advancing along the river systems. And if they gain a foothold, what happens? Just like up here, if they push in to the valleys, then they can push out, fan out into various windbreaks, outflanking the Ukrainians more or less, and Ukraine will be forced to fall back one windbreak after the other. This is not going to happen in a day or two. This will take months, more than likely. I mean, it took Russia a month, more than a month, to grab this territory here, so it's going to be taking months and months of fighting for Russia to push through here, and Ukraine will be sending in reinforcements to prevent that from happening. Just like we're seeing, they pushed Russia back up here, pushed Russia back down here, because they know, Ukraine knows, that this valley is extremely vital, and they need to keep Russia out of this valley and river system where Russia can rely on cover to advance. And we also have a small valley and river up here that Russia may be able to reach if they are sneaking and pushing hard enough, or if they get further into this river here and valley system here. So if Russia establishes a foothold here and starts moving west in this favorable terrain, they will eventually reach Kupiansk. And also, if they get into the river here and valley here and fan out southward, they can reach this yellow dotted line, which is a highway and the main supply route for Ukraine from Kupiansk to the front line further south. So if Russia can get in here and say in a month or two they push down here, they've cut it off, and Ukraine needs to find other ways to reach the front line. There are obviously several other roads, but this is a main highway, and logistics likes to use big roads that it's easy to move along, so they can transport stuff effectively and quickly. So this is why this is the main supply route. This is why Russia wants to cut it, and this is why Ukraine is putting in an effort to keep Russia out of the valley and river system. Right, next stop is Terny, west of Crimea, and the Russians have made some gains in their push towards this town located right next to an important river. But it appears as if Ukraine has actually been able to hold the line for the last couple of days. And here we can see where we have Terny located in that small bulge that Russia has created north of Lysychansk, or is it northwest even? In that area is where we have Crimea and Terny. Right, let's see here. Where is it? There we go. So Terny up here, Crimea. Now, on the 12th of December, the Russians have basically the entire year tried to push through the forests here in order to reach Sarichin. There's a river running here all the way up here, and they tried to reach the town of Sarichin, the bridges crossing the river over here. uh, by going through the woods here. But now lately they have made, since they haven't made any headway through here, they have actually switched around and instead attempted a push up here, and it's been somewhat successful, or was for a couple of days until Ukraine managed to get their shit together and put a stop to the Russian advance so far. And it's this area here basically, and the Russians are trying to push west to reach Terny. Down here you have Sarichin and Torske, the other two times that the Russians have tried to reach from the south but failed. So now they did a switcheroo and made a strong push west from positions over here basically, and trying to take the Ukrainians off guard and reaching Terny. And here we can see on the 30th of November the Russian lines and a windbreak and another windbreak that we will use as reference. 2nd of December, you can see that Russia has made some significant advances in and around these windbreaks. You can see here, compared to here, and yeah, the Russians meant business, and they actually a day or two later pushed up and had this territory here as well. But then Ukraine put a stop to it, put a stop to the nonsense, counterattacked, and as you can see, they this area here was Russian control, and it is now contested instead. The Ukrainians put in a counterattack and pushed the Russians back. The Russians have, however, held on to the territory they've gained down here. But as you can see, 10 days later on, not much has happened. And that is because the Ukrainians are holding the line and preventing the Russians from pushing further. And here we can see what the Russians are after. They are after these valleys here, 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 and down here. I mean, if you've seen my previous videos, I've already pointed this out, you know this. But these valleys will allow the Russians to reach Terny and without having to cross these wide open fields that are death traps. And if they push through here or any of these valleys, basically they reach Terny, and if they grab Terny, well, then they have these yellow dotted lines that are highways, supply routes that the Russians can utilize to bring in troops and equipment to Terny to then try and push across the river and reach the western side of the river. So that is what the Russians are up to here. That is why they decided to stop trying to go through the forest and instead make a push here. And they made a substantial push, like I said. They were basically, their lines were at this highway here, and then they surprised the Ukrainians, got into the valley here, and started to make headway in here and got this far. But up here the Ukrainians pushed them back to where they are at now. But as you can see, the Russians are still in a position to try and push into the valleys, especially down here. And we are gonna focus a bit on this area down here. As you can see, the Russians are in control of the windbreak here. They have this section of the valley. They have pushed they pushed along this windbreak and into the valley here, grabbing the wooded area here. And their goal right now is to gain access to this area here, because this forest, as you can see, continues all along the valley, basically all the way up to Terny itself. And this is the Russians' best point of attack, really, if they want to have any headway. As you can see, It's not that far between the Ukrainians and the Russians here, and from here it's not that far for the Russians to push into the valley proper and gain access to the woods. And yeah, if we zoom in on this stretch of forest here, you can see this is the forest that the Russians are in control of, and the windbreaks here are in Ukrainian control. Down here it's listed as contested, but I think this is probably still under Ukrainian control because there is some distance between the Russian positions and these windbreaks. So I don't think the Russians have managed to make a dash across here. I think Ukraine is still in control here. But the Russians have one point that favors an approach, and it's up here. As you can see, obviously now it's winter, so it won't be green. It's just barren trees, basically barren bushes, but it's still the best point of attack with some cover. And so this is most likely where the Russians try and get across and get to grips with the Ukrainians over here and establish a foothold. Maybe here, because you know it's a 50-meter dash. It's risky as hell, but maybe if they get enough suppression going, they might be able to get across. But my guess is that this is where the Russians will try and reach Ukrainian positions so that they can then push along the windbreak towards the forest and the larger valley. And here we have a 3D image. This section here that is in Russian control, it's this forest here. And windbreak, it's this here. As you can see, it's a downward slope. It's shut down, god damn it. It's a downward slope, and if this is the area where the Russians probably will try and get across. And that's that green patch here. So as you can see up here, this is high ground, and I think the Ukrainians are in control of it. It's listed as contested, but I think this is Ukrainian territory, and I think they're firing across the valley here at the Russians. The Russians are probably returning fire, and lots of shooting going back and forth, more than likely. And well, if you take a look at this, if the Ukrainians are having the high ground here in the forest, they can just fire across any Russian trying to cross. So the Russians really only have one option, and that is to try and get across here, like I said, this stretch of terrain here, because going over the open ground up here, that would be a death sentence. There will be Ukrainians all over the greenery here, firing at anything that is moving out in the open. So yeah, and if the Russians want to get up here, they have to run down and then uphill. So now this is probably Ukrainian territory, and they're probably applying pressure into the Russian positions, and the Russians are obviously returning fire. So yeah, here you have it. The Russian positions in this forest here, Ukrainians in the windbreaks, the wooded, bushy area where the Russians more than likely will try and push across, probably facing a lot of incoming Ukrainian fire that will try and prevent the Russians from making it all the way over into the windbreak. But you can see here it's downward slope. If the Ukrainians are located here, which they are, they have ample opportunity to open fire at anything that is moving out in the open, and also just firing straight into Russian positions in this forest here. The Russians, they only have one option, and that is going across here, maybe here, but remember that was 50 meters across to reach this contested windbreak. So no, I really do think that the Russians only have one option, and that is to get in here, and from here try and get control of this windbreak. And then they are in the valley proper, and as you can see, it's one massive forest, probably with a river at the bottom of it. And at the very end, the vital and important objective, Terny. You can also see the other valley up here. Likewise, if the Russians can get into this valley, it will take them all the way to Terny as well. Why do I think this valley is more important than the others? Well, it's because it's forested. It provides a lot of cover, and it allows the Russians to more easily advance and maneuver. Yes, it favors the defenders as well, the forest. It's probably full of trenches and foxholes filled with very angry Ukrainians. But this terrain is still more favorable than moving around up here in the open fields or in these narrow windbreaks. That definitely favors a defender. So the Russians want to get into the forest because here they can apply pressure on multiple points of contact, try and outmaneuver the Ukrainians, and rely on the cover that they can find in a forested area in order to approach Ukrainian defensive positions. So yes, the Ukrainians, they can hide their trenches, they can hide their foxholes much more easily in a forested area like this, but it also gives the Russians a better opportunity to advance and attack. So they want to get into this valley, they want to utilize the cover that the forest provides so that they can, with their numerical advantage, overwhelm Ukrainian positions and slowly but surely push along the valley towards Terny. And the Ukrainians really need to prevent this from happening. Obviously, it's this location here, located here, and as you can see, this is the forested valley leading all the way to Terny. So if the Russian gets into this valley, they will probably over time be able to slowly push along and reach Terny. And the best way for Ukraine to prevent this from happening is to hold this area here. This area here, if the Ukrainians can hold this and prevent the Russians from crossing, I think Ukraine more or less have the ability to put a stop to this entire push. There's a forest here that the Ukrainians managed to hold, and from that forest they pushed the Russians all the way back here again. And if they can redo that here and maybe even reclaim the valley if the Russians take too many losses, then this won't go anywhere. The Russians can't push into this middle valley if they have no control of this valley or this valley, because then the Ukrainians will just outflank any Russian push into the center here. So the Ukrainians are holding this forest. The Russians need this forest if they want to push into this valley, and the Ukrainians have obviously pushed the Russians way back. And now it's time for the Ukrainians to do the same here. The Russians are trying to gain access here, but if the Ukrainians can hold this windbreak here, and maybe even if the Ukrainians can counterattack and get into this stretch of woods, then this assault into this valley will have failed as well. And then I think the Russian attempt to reach Terny will have failed completely, and they will abandon this attempt to reach Terny altogether. Right, next stop is Bakhmut, a city that doesn't need any more introduction, I think, to people following the war down in Ukraine. Fun note, recorded this segment last night and discovered this morning that it had not recorded at all, so I have to redo it. Also, a slight map update in the Bakhmut area, since I had plans on uploading this on the 12th and now we're on the 13th. So, but I'll deal with it as we get that far. Moving on. My dog is moving around the background. Hopefully that won't annoy too many people. Bakhmut, yeah, we're up at Terny. Next up, Bakhmut, like we all know. Nothing strange. And here we have, as you can see, on the, intended to do this on the 12th. The extent of Ukraine's push around Bakhmut. This is basically how far they went, and at this point in time, tables were turned, and instead Russia began to reclaim territory inch by inch. And the last couple of days, it's more than an inch here and there. They are pushing hard into Ukrainian positions. We've seen Russia grab some territory up here. They made a push in here, in this area here. And they've also made some gains south of Bakhmut. And in the latest map update, they've pushed even further. I'm going to take a closer look at that. But the main push has been here out of Perkivka and Yahidne, pushing up on this hill north of Bakhmut. As you can see here, Russia used to control territory right next to these two towns, and now they have pushed quite a ways up the hill and are almost past Kromove on the hill itself. And taking for a closer look at Russia's advance, here we have a windbreak and a road, a highway that we can use for reference. 27th of November compared to 12th of December. You can see here this windbreak and this windbreak, quite the difference, and especially down here by the road here, massive difference. Russia used to be way over here, and then they have pushed along the farmland here, and they used to be up here, pushed past the windbreak and into this farm here and what have you. So Russia is on the move, make no mistake about it. We can also see down here, take a look, pushed in along this windbreak. And yeah, we're gonna be focusing a bit down here later on. Oh, I forgot the order I was doing the maps. God damn it. Anyway, we can now see a bit closer on Russia's advances up on the hill here, heading for Bodanivka. And right here we have the small village of Kromove right outside of Bakhmut. And they've pushed up to the edge here of this is the edge of the hill here. They've taken this here dam and a canal and another dam, so they're pushing it along the low ground here, taking the windbreak here on the edge of the hill. And as you can see, they've pushed into this farm here, securing that one. And they've also begun pushing down a small stream here, and they've taken ground in towards a small lake or pond here just outside Bodanivka. Right, so this was the image I was thinking of. Sorry, a bit of a confusion here in the morning. Right, so Russia pushed in here at Kromove, pushed in here along the edge of the hill, the ridge line, along the windbreaks, grabbing the slopes and what have you. and pushing up on along the road here apparently. And yeah, a bit of Swedish here in the middle of everything. Racing bana, race court, racing track. And these are the windbreaks in Russian control. We have the edges of Kromova down here, and the Russians have probably been able to utilize some different elevation differences to move up along the road here, utilizing cover that we can't really see on the map here. So what are they after? Well, I believe they want to push into the low ground here or along skirting the slopes, because this here is a hill, and then you have a small village, and here you have a forest. And this is the farm that the Russians are occupying as they are trying to outflank Bodanivka. And I think the Russians, they really want to get into this low ground here. It provides cover from Ukrainian guns. Obviously, drones will be overhead, and there's always the risk of drones and artillery. But if they get into the valley here, there's no direct line of sight. If Russia manages to grab this hill, if they manage to grab this forest, and if they manage to grab this village. So I think they want to get in here, grab these three features to allow them to get more troops in, and then from the village itself they can start moving up these windbreaks to outflank Ukrainians holding the road. And in so doing, they help their friendlies over here as they push in and try and outflank Bodanivka. So I think that's what's going on. And the way things are going at the moment, with how much territory Russia is gaining in short, quick order, this could happen in just a couple of days, that Russia pushes in here and grabs the village, maybe even the hill, and then they can launch an assault on the forest. I suspect Ukraine will be able to hold on to the forest longer than the hill and village. See what happens. And yeah, if they grab this area, then they can begin to advance along these windbreaks and outflank the Ukrainians, and probably begin to force the Ukrainians to fall back one windbreak at a time. And that would leave Russians over here in an excellent position to push in and begin outflanking the town of Bodanivka. So yeah, I think we will be seeing this move from the Russians in the next coming days. Moving north slightly down here, the village I was talking about. The farm I mentioned, that is in Russian control. You can see that the area here is contested, and the Russians are pushing this windbreak here will probably in short order be under Russian control. I can't imagine the Ukrainians holding on for that for too long. But the Russians, they're after Bodanivka. As you can see, they've pushed in here. Here's a small stream connected to this river here, and they've pushed in here to right next to the lake here, the pond. And there's only like 500 meters from the Russian positions to the town, so expect a push here in the next coming days. And yeah, as you can see here is the small stream connected to the valley and river, and the Russians are here. They're probably gonna try and push in here as well as pushing down this way. And if they grab the village down here, like I said, then they can move up these windbreaks to try and outflank the Ukrainians all along the road here, and even continue down this windbreak and this road to reach Bodanivka. And taking a 3D view of the situation, the Russian controlled windbreak located here, the pond, and yeah, 500 meters along the pond, along the lake, into this windbreak, and then they're in town. And this is the move I think they're trying to do. This is the small stream as well, and as you can see, here's the stream and here's the small valley with the river. Making this move, They stay away from the wide open spaces where there are easy targets, there's cover, and they can start pushing in towards town from the high ground. And also, if they manage to push up these windbreaks, like I talked about before, grabbing this territory here gives Russia, like I said, the high ground and the ability to fire directly into town if they find enemy strongholds within Bodanivka itself. Likewise, if Russia does not grab this territory and start pushing in, Ukraine can can fire at Russian positions. This windbreak here is currently contested, but I think Russia will be able to grab it. It's a difficult location for Ukraine to resupply and push in more reinforcements. So I think Russia will be able to cross the river and maybe grab this windbreak. It's going to be more difficult for them to push on, though, from that windbreak to the next, for the same reasons that Ukraine will have trouble reinforcing this position. But if Russia manages this, maybe they will have vehicles and what have you up here on the hill, on the high ground, firing across the river into Ukrainian positions here. Then maybe Russia can establish a foothold here. And like we saw on this side of the valley, if they can push in here, it's going to be a tough fight. Lots of angry Ukrainians will be in the way. But if they establish a foothold here, then again they can start firing, or rather here is where they want to end up. Then they can start firing into town at Ukrainian strongholds as they begin to push into town from these two locations and start fighting building to building. So that's what's going on. I think this is what the Russians are after at the moment. Bodanivka, they have to push in from various angles in order to outflank Ukrainian positions to open up and prepare for this final assault on the town itself. Right, taking a look at the updates that I noticed this morning. 13th of December update. 12th of December showed us this map, and then boom, this happened. Russia pushed in here and they extended their control here, southward, north of Klishivka. And let's take a look at what happened up here. As you can see, Russia pushed westward, managed to cross an open area here and got into this suburban area here. And taking a closer look, the previous edge of Russian control, and now they pushed out all the way over here and pushed Ukraine back. So, and maybe they managed to push across a couple of locations here. Maybe that was the thing that took Ukrainians by surprise, but feels like the more natural approach would be here and here with the most cover, and where they could do a pincer move on the Ukrainians. Whatever happened, if they came across here or moved along the arrows, doesn't really matter. Russia has gained access to this suburban area and pushed Ukraine back. And Ukraine are now holding this area. As you can see, not as many buildings, not as much trees and bushes and gardens, much more open space. So Russia has the advantage here in this area now with controlling the area with the most cover. And from here they can strike out at will as they see fit when they find a gap in the Ukrainian lines and when they get an advantage in a clash between troops. So I think Ukraine might lose this entire area in the next coming days, by the way things are going. And there we go. My headset shut down. This is not my morning. The dogs are making a fuss in the background. Headset's not working. Oh my God. Anyway, moving on. Yeah. So between the 12th and the 13th, we can see here how Russia has made a push into area that was previously contested, and that is this area here, this stretch of woods. And the question is, what are they after? Well, they are trying to outflank Klishivka, which is in Ukrainian control, and they are pushing along the hill to gain the high ground and to be able to fire into into Klishivka, in order to more than likely support a assault of the town itself. And if we zoom in, we can see what the Russians are probably trying to reach. It's this trench line system right here, following the edge of the hill. So they are gonna try and push in here into the trenches, clear them out, and use them for themselves as a defensive position that the Ukrainians will have to deal with if they want to push the Russians back. And it also gives the Russians excellent positions of overwatch, firing at Ukrainian strongpoints within the town of Klishivka and the surrounding area. And here you have it. This is the trench line system. The Russians are currently here. Here we have Klishivka in Ukrainian control. And from this hill, they can fire all the way into town. And they can fire into town from this forest as well. So yeah, very important that Ukraine manages to hold these trenches, because if they don't, Russia controls this hill and they basically control the surrounding area. It's not that they can fire at Ukrainians 5 miles away. That's not what a hill does. It allows you to open fire on territory close to the hill. It's not like, oh, now we have fire control of all the supply routes leading into a city that everyone thought was the case when Ukraine took this hill. That's not how hills work. You gain the high ground so that you can shoot at stuff around the hill, close to the hill, not, miles and miles away. That's not how things work. So anyway, that's what the Russians are after. Gain control of this ridge, the edge of the hill here, so that they can start firing on the area surrounding the hill, and in this case, Klishivka. Kristen kyrka, Swedish for Christian church, by the way. Another angle, the trenches here, as you can see, slope into a valley with the forest. So if the Russians push out here, then the Ukrainians will be in this forest here, and there will be fires, exchange of fire between the Ukrainians in the woods and the Russians on the hill. But the Russians will have the advantage. And as you can see, they can basically dominate this wide open area here. And the Ukrainians will have real trouble trying to reclaim the trenches if the Russians gets this far. And you can also see that it continues all the way over here, the trench line, giving the Russians an excellent position to lock down the wide open farmland at that. So yeah, if the Russians gets this far, Ukraine will have to struggle if they want to reclaim these trenches. Right, now Avdiivka, the town city that we've focused so much on the last couple of months as Russia's tried to surround it, not being entirely successful. Thank God, Ukraine is putting up a stiff resistance and the Russians are struggling. But they still make ground, and in the last couple of days they actually made significant gains that I think is very crucial. And yes, we have Avdiivka, slightly south of Bakhmut, obviously. And you can see the Russian attempt to push out to surround the city and cut it off from all reinforcements. And let's see here, where is it? Here we go. Yeah, as you can see, not that much has happened in the last couple of weeks. To be perfectly honest, we had this morning an update down here. The Russians have pushed slightly further west down here. But the most significant change on the map over the last couple of days, weeks, is here. As you can see, Russia were outside of this lake, this dam, but here they managed to push into a suburban area north of Avdiivka. And this is one of the most important changes on the map in this theater of operations in many, many days, if you ask me. And taking a look here, you can see where Russia has pushed in the last couple of days, and that is this area here. You can see it's a suburban area, and before you reach the main urban regions of the city in the northern parts. And Russia has, for the last couple of days, weeks, mainly tried to push into grab this water treatment plant. Failed. It's still contested, so furious fighting going on between the Ukrainians and the Russians in this water treatment plant. And if Russia manages to secure the water treatment plant, then they are in an okay position. It's wide open spaces here, but they're in an okay position to push across and into the forests here, so that they can start pushing into the suburban area here and gain access to the city from the north. And since Ukraine has been able to hold the water treatment plant, Russia has now forcefully pushed their advantage here and have gained access to the suburban area here. And that is quite significant. Taking a look what we're dealing with, as you can see, gardens, houses. This is obviously winter now, snow-covered, barren trees, and the buildings are bombed to bits, ruins only. But this is the terrain we're talking about that the Russians have pushed in and forced Ukraine to the south. And this is why it's significant. As you can see, the contested water treatment plant that Ukraine refuses to let go of. But now, as Russia has pushed in this far, they can, with some effort, get across here and potentially outflank the water treatment plant. And if they manage to push even further south, unless Ukraine manages to hold the line, there's another access way here across the dams that allows the Russians to potentially open fire on Ukrainians trying to resupply resupport the resupport, is that even a word? To support and reinforce was the word I was looking for, the water treatment plant. And I mean, if you want to really be doom and gloom, if Russia gains access all the way down here, then they can push across here and start threatening Ukrainian positions in the forest. And they have cover all the way. Yes, Ukrainians, they have cover too, but I mean, if the Russians want to cross here, it's wide open spaces, much more difficult for the Russians to advance in this terrain than it is over here. That is why it's so significant that they have managed to grab this part of town, and then they can now rely on cover as they advance and attack southward, reaching these crossings where they can outflank Ukrainian positions and potentially threaten the forest down here. And if they pull this off and grab the water treatment plant, well, then they can stage an assault on the forest in earnest, to be honest. And why it's significant in the long run? Well, Russia is up here at the moment, here, holding the water, fighting for the water treatment plant. Well, they can push in, like I said, outflank the water treatment plant, grab it, and then in a combined effort, start pushing into the Ukrainian positions here in the forest. They can continue southward here, push into the suburban area here, outflanking the Ukrainians even more. So if they attack from here as well as down here, I mean, the Ukrainians will be forced to abandon these positions altogether at some point. And obviously, they can continue south through the suburban area to reach the proper urban setting. And this is very significant because if things go as the Russians want, they can then reach this yellow dotted line right here. And that is the main supply route leading into Avdiivka. This is the most vital supply route that Ukraine has in holding Avdiivka, supplying the troops, bringing in reinforcements, bringing the wounded out, and what have you. So if the Russians can move down like this, bypassing the coke plant, then they have not only cut off the coke plant from Avdiivka, they've also cut off Avdiivka from resupplies. From resupplying. Sorry, my brain is not functioning as it should this morning. So yes, Russia got stuck on the water treatment plant. They couldn't get across the open fields. They have now pushed into the suburban area here, gained a foothold, and now they can advance relying on cover to put pressure on the Ukrainians, potentially outflank them, and maybe in the long run get as far as being able to cut off the coke plant and cutting off Avdiivka. So very important that Ukraine manages to hold the line here and better yet push the Russians out of this suburban area. Because if the Russians can start pushing southward, it will be not a good position for the Ukrainians. Right, so that was detailing what's going on over here. And we've seen the Russians, they're trying to take Sepova for quite some time. They made some gains up here, trying to bypass the Ukrainians, outmaneuver them, reach Berdichev from the north to cut this vital supply line. They're steadily taking ground here in the industrial zone outside of the quarry in order to secure it and then be able to move out into forests and gain some high ground and push into the city here from the south. This is not unimportant, obviously. This, however, push here, very important in case they manage to go all the way down here and cut the supply line here. There is another point of contact around Avdiivka that I think is super important, and that is here. And I don't think that many people are reporting on it. And that is outside of Kamyanka. We have Kamyanka. The Russians have been pushing into this valley here with the river. And why they're doing that is twofold. One objective is to go here into a small town. And the other objective is to go here and grab this hill. Kamyanka, they've been pushing into the river and valley here, this way. And I think they want to push along, continue along the river. And there's a couple of small villages here that they need to secure. But in order to reach this settlement here, Ukraine has attempted to push along the highway towards Kamyanka. So I think the Russians, they want to go through the river and grab this village in order to secure this large flat farmland area that surrounds Kamyanka. But equally important, perhaps more important, is that Russia, if they push into the river here and the valley and grab these small villages, they can push up this hill. Obviously, Ukraine will be occupying it, firing into the valley. Russia will have to deal with that and call in a lot of artillery to silence any Ukrainians located on the hill. But I think the Russians, the goal of pushing into the river here is mainly to reach this hill and also the town over here. But this hill, and gain the high ground and gain overwatch positions on the Ukrainians in the surrounding area. And here you have the hill and the reason why the hill is important. Here you have Avdiivka. If you take this hill, you can start pounding buildings all along the outskirts of the city itself, helping any Russian troops trying to assault the city. And more crucially, there's a small town here, or if it's a suburban area of Avdiivka, that this hill has a very good overwatch position on. As you can see, the hill and this town here, suburban area, if the Russians push up here, they can start firing to Ukrainian strongholds all over the place, supporting Russian troops pushing in to gain a foothold and securing this section of Avdiivka, this suburban area. And take a look here, the hill. If they support an assault from the hill and the assault pushes in, gains access, starts expanding influence and controls this area, then Russia is in an excellent position to start assaulting the outskirts of the city. So grabbing the hill will allow Russia to launch or stage attacks into this suburban area here by being able to have positions on the hill firing at Ukrainian strongholds, and that will allow the Russians to have an easier time of gaining access to this area. And if they secure this area, then it's only a matter of time before they start launching attacks into Avdiivka, trying to claim these, I don't know, industrial locations, schools, or whatever it is. Yeah, who knows? But yes, so this hill, the push into the valley, is crucial for the Russians in order to reach the hill. Grab the hill, they can grab the suburbs. If they have the suburbs, they can launch attacks on Avdiivka. So yeah, that's what's going on there. And I don't think all that many people have reported on that Russia is trying to reach this very vital hill. And so yeah, keep a lookout for that. I think Russia will be making some advances in the coming days, unless, of course, Ukraine manages to hold the line, which we all hope, obviously. Next, we have the town of Novomykhailivka, south of Marinka. Everyone's talking about Marinka, how Russia has finally taken Marinka, a important town right outside of Donetsk. But I like to focus on this town, Novomykhailivka, south of Marinka, because I think it's actually just as important and maybe even more important than Marinka. And here we have Novomykhailivka, south of Donetsk, south of Avdiivka, not that far away from Vuhledar, that was made famous last winter when Russia lost, what was it, 100, 200 armored vehicles trying to cross open farmland. And yeah, so let's take a closer look at Novomykhailivka, south of Marinka. And Yes, here we have Marinka, and down here we have Novomykhailivka. And as you can see here, yeah, it's the updated map here with new Russian gains. As you can see, we have this road here for reference, road here for reference, and then terrain feature here for reference. If we begin up here, you can see Russia has made some gains here and also secured Marinka. And so Marinka is now, according to Deepstate map, fully in Russian control, and they've secured the crossroad intersection here. And the big push came here out in the farmland, as you can see. We have the bend in the road, and now Russian control. They pushed out and taken control of several windbreaks. And the Ukrainians have fallen back to defend Popida. And so Russians are pushing in towards this small village here. And in the south, as you can see, this was the edge of the contested area. The contested area has now been expanded to all up to the edge of the town of Novomykhailivka. And if we're gonna be taking a look at the Russians' gains directly south of Marinka, we have Marinka now in Russian control. Popieda, here we have the pronunciation, Popieda, that small village. And this is the area that Russia now has managed to grab from Ukraine. These windbreaks here, and they farm up here or whatever it is. And so they are close, and they have also pushed into the intersection crossroad here. So they're pushing towards Popieda. They are after this small village. And as you can see, it's on the road south towards a string of villages and towns that are linked with Novomykhailivka. And here we have Novomykhailivka. We can see this was the extent of the contested area a day or two ago. And now Russia is contesting the area all the way up to the edge of the town itself. And what's going on in Novomykhailivka? Well, Russia is pushing in along these valleys with streams, rivers in them, so they can avoid the wide open spaces that are kill zones. So here they have cover, they can advance along the windbreaks, and they have slowly been pushing the Ukrainians back for 2 months basically. They've taken 2 kilometers through these valleys for the past 2 months, and now in the last couple of days they've pushed the contested area all the way back to the edge of town itself. And Novomykhailivka is located in a small valley where a river runs, and there's lakes and ponds and what have you, small towns, small villages, all along following this small river and valley. And the Russians, they have steadily been pushing towards Novomykhailivka. And for some reason people have hardly reported on it, I feel. But their goal is this town, make no mistake about it. And the reason is here you have Novomykhailivka, and here you have a valley with a river, and look at all the towns and villages. And from Novomykhailivka to Kostiantynivka, it's only about 2 kilometers, less so obviously to Paraskovivka. So if they can establish a foothold here, then they can push towards one settlement at a time. Obviously, this will not be done in a day or two. This will take months, but they can advance along this river in this valley without having to cross the wide open spaces. And as they take each town and village, they can expand and fan outward along the windbreaks. They don't have to cross the farmland. All they need to do is take a town, and then they have access to the windbreaks from the south and can push north. And if they push in from Marinka and take Popieda, then they can start pushing south along the highway here and link up with the Russians, outflank Ukrainians and what have you. So this is super important. If Russia gains access to Novomykhailivka and start pushing along the river, then they can start fanning out into the windbreaks one at a time without having to cross the dangerous area between the windbreaks. They don't have to cross the open farmland. It's a similar situation up in Marinka. Marinka is also located at a river and a valley. Not as many settlements, but they can push out from Marinka and do the same, starting to push into the windbreaks from the north. So Marinka and Novomykhailivka, if they start pushing into rivers, then they can fan out north and south and link up somewhere in between and steadily grab the terrain and territory we are seeing here. So not at all unimportant what's going on down here in the south. And I think this town might be more important than Marinka, because this town gives them access to this very important valley and river. And after Novomykhailivka, we're gonna be moving west to Robotyne, where Ukraine this summer and fall tried to punch through the Russian defensive lines. And they were close. They reached the trenches, they reached the Russian defenses, and almost managed to gain access to the small town of Verbove. And had they done that, they would have been able to push through that town and actually breach straight through the Russian defenses. Unfortunately, that did not happen, and now there's a bit of a stalemate. But over the past couple of days, Russia has made some advances into liberated territory. And this will just be a brief. And finally, last but not least, we will take a very brief look at Krynki, the town on the banks of the Dnieper River, where Ukraine has crossed and managed to get a foothold. So Krynki, located outside of Kherson, not far from Crimea, a very important bridgehead if Ukraine can hold on to it, because if they can grab Krynki, secure it, and manage to steadily get troops over the river, maybe even a couple of more vehicles, then they can expand their influence around Krynki and in the end be able to launch offensive actions into the occupied territories and start liberating this part of the country. So Krynki is super important, but it's not without issues. The lines have more or less been static for weeks and weeks and weeks, which is both positive and negative. It's positive because it means Russia has not been able to push Ukraine out of Krynki or push them back to the river. The negative is, of course, that Ukraine has not been able to expand their influence, and they remain in place, and they remain very vulnerable where they are. And it's not really that surprising. They took Russia by surprise when they crossed the river, and Russia responded in kind. They have sent in everything in the arsenal, artillery, air power, everything, to contain the Ukrainians in this location, because Russia knows if Ukraine grabs Krynki, if the Ukrainians grabs the woods and forests outside of Krynki, then Russia will not be able to push the Ukrainians back across the river, and the Ukrainians can start building up a larger force that can then begin offensive maneuvers in the occupied area and begin expanding Ukrainian influence in and around Krynki. That will, in the end, threaten Crimea itself. So The Russians are sending in lots and lots of artillery, lots and lots of air power to contain the Ukrainians in this area and to deny them a chance to build up a proper force and to expand their influence. And of course, the Ukrainians, they're doing their best to hold on to what they've gained, and they've even managed to get across a couple of vehicles. Remember, was it a week or two ago, and people went, "Oh, now Ukraine has vehicles across the Dnipro. Blitzkrieg is coming." No, it's not. No, it's not. You you don't get the amount of vehicles you need for offensive actions across a river when you're constantly harassed by drones, artillery, and airstrikes. That's just not how it goes. They managed to get a couple of lighter vehicles across to help them defend the territory they've gained. That's about it. It helps them hold on to what they've taken, but it won't help them to expand into the occupied territories. That will come at a later date, more probably around spring. Right now, it's about holding on to what you've taken and reinforcing and building up to a point where you can then launch an attack after New Year's, around springtime, is my guess. But before the Ukrainians get that far, they have a problem, a real issue, and it was revealed by a Ukrainian soldier in an interview with Business Insider a couple of days ago, when he told the interviewer, the journalist, that some of the reinforcements, the troops that have been deployed to Krinky to help the Marines hold on to the village, only had 3 weeks of training. So they are going to be in a very exposed position, in a very tough firefight, with very little reinforcements, difficult to get proper supplies across the river and what have you. And you have troops that only have 3 weeks of training. This is a dire situation for you and the Ukrainians, and hopefully they will be able to hold. Hopefully the more experienced troops can take care of these new recruits with only 3 weeks of training, teach them what needs to be learned in order to survive, in order to hold territory, and hopefully that will be enough for them to hold on to Krinky and allow more powerful units to cross the river eventually down the line. But at the moment, with these fresh recruits with only 3 weeks of training, it's I think it's a bit touch and go at the moment if Ukraine will hold on to Krinky for the duration of the winter. I have to say, not gonna lie, I'm a bit worried, but we'll see what happens. That's all I have for you today. Like I said, the plan was to have this video uploaded yesterday. That did not happen, so instead of the 12th, you're getting it on the 13th, and yeah, that is the end of this video. I'll see you in the next one. And as always, gå på marsch, Ukraine. Give them hell.